Richard, you've written extensively about geopolitics in Southeast Asia and particularly about the conflict in the South China Sea. Now, my question to you was about the recent UN ruling, which ruled that China has no legal claims whatsoever to the South China Sea islands, and it was a sweeping victory. Now, will the ruling, in your opinion, make any difference at all to the conflict?
Of course, one of the key findings was that China's historic rights claim to almost the entirety of the South China Sea has no basis in modern international law, that there's no consistency between China's historical rights doctrine on one hand and prevailing legal regimes. That was very clear. Nonetheless, remember, this court was formed under the aegis of the UNCLOS, and the UNCLOS has no mandate or jurisdiction over questions that relate to national sovereignty. So what the court was able to do was to compress China's historic rights and say that China cannot claim extensive claim to the entire seabed resources and fishery resources all across the South China Sea. In short, it cannot treat South China Sea as if it's a domestic lake just because perhaps their ancestors traversed that area. That is not, in modern international law, tantamount to expression of continuous and effective sovereignty.
The UN arbitration panel did not take a position on who owns the disputed bits of the sea?
Yeah, the arbitration panel, of course, the first thing was they compressed the historic rights claim. In essence, China cannot claim the entirety of fishery resources and seabed resources because much of the South China Sea are considered as high seas. They fall outside the maritime entitlement claims of individual land features in the area. The other important implication of the verdict from The Hague was that there are no islands, naturally formed islands, per Article 121 of UNCLOS in the Spratly chain of islands. So that means some of them are only rocks, right, that can generate 12 nautical miles of territorial sea at the most, but not an exclusive economic zone, while the rest are only low tide elevation that cannot generate any sovereignty claim, even if China has artificially built islands on top of them. So in short, it nullified China's claim based on artificial island construction. Now, but the status of who owns those individual islands, like the Scarborough Shoal, for instance, that has not been resolved by this verdict. So this verdict is just one step in a journey of 1,000 miles to legally verify the validity of the claim. But I think among objective observers, particularly outside China, there is a consensus that China is definitely claiming well beyond what international law accords it.
So we've got China, we've got Japan, we've got ASEAN. Everybody wants to protect their national interests and their sovereignty. Given how high the stakes are, do you think diplomacy will work?
Right. I mean, first of all, I think using a metaphor in medicine, you have to first diagnose what is the problem. I think the problem we have in South China Sea is that in many ways it's a perfect storm. It marks the convergence of various unfavorable factors. I mean, one factor clearly is the rise of popular nationalism. Much more explicit in the case of China, because since 1992 China has introduced this patriotic education program which instills this sense of victimhood, instills this sense of grievance and this call for redressing the past atrocity against China. So it makes China feel that they have to amend for their past humiliations, and that makes them more aggressive than they should be. I think it's also the factor of ASEAN embracing a rising Chinese economic powerhouse. If you look at it, after 2002, you had the free trade agreement between China and ASEAN, and China rapidly transforms from a marginal economic player in the region, an isolated communist country, into the biggest trading partner of ASEAN, and perhaps soon even the biggest investment partner, foreign direct investment empowerment. So I think ASEAN was distracted by the very flowery, very the bright prospects in the economic realm, and I believe that continues to be a problem today. There's, I think, this lopsided strategic perception that we can just gloss over political security problems like South China Sea by just focusing on economic affairs. But I think history shows that those two are very much entwined. You cannot have one without having the other, and I think this is something that the ASEAN has to accept. But the problem with the ASEAN is that its very institutional design is not catching up with new realities.